going to read from Matthew chapter 2. Matthew chapter 2, and it's page 966 in the Church Bible. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star in the east and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and the teachers of the law, he asked them where the Christ was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be the shepherd of my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and make a careful search for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen in the east went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold and of incense and of myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We sing the song, "Father in heaven, how we love you." Now, we don't know what the star was exactly that the wise men were following. Some think it might have been a comet or a supernova, when a star goes ballistic, basically. Or it could have been a conjunction of two major planets, Jupiter and Saturn. They were lined up at the same time, or roughly the time when Jesus was born, and that alignment would have caused a great light in the sky. Whatever the maker of the universe, whatever the maker of the cosmos actually used, the result was there was a star that appeared at the time of Jesus' birth, and it was interpreted in a very significant way. And the visit itself was full of symbolism. These wise men weren't just sort of on the peripheral of the Christmas story. They are actually at the very heart of it, even if the fact is they didn't turn up on the night when Jesus was born, as the shepherds did. I know that if you look at a lot of nativity scenes, you've got shepherds, wise men, and everyone all crowded in. It wasn't really like that. The shepherds arrived first, they went off, and then maybe 2 years later, the wise men turned up. Now, you might think they were a bit late, but it's a long journey they had to travel. So it's not a peripheral thing, the wise men's visit. It's at the heart of the Christmas story. And the reason it's at heart is because of who they were. Now, it's not because they were people who studied the stars and were deemed to be wise. It wasn't that at all. It was because they weren't Jews. In other words, they were Gentiles. That's the significance of these people visiting Jesus and being welcomed, and that they were able to worship Jesus, is because Jesus is not just for one group of people. He's not just for the Jews. He's not just the saviour of the Jewish nation. He is the saviour of the world. And so the Gentiles, in the form of these wise men, are coming, and they are telling us that we can come too. So just as the Gentiles in the form of the wise men could come and worship Jesus, so we can come and worship Jesus as well. We are not barred because of our race, whatever race that might be. Whatever nationality you are still able to come and worship at the feet of Jesus. And I think that's brilliant. There is no one saying, well, let's check your identity. Let's check your credentials. Let's make sure that you are, I was going to say kosher. There's none of that anymore. It's only if you want to, and if you are willing to come and bow before Jesus. There's no bar because of race. There's no bar because of background. There's no bar because of who you might be, or think you are not. Everyone can come. See, Jesus wasn't born for a select few. He wasn't born for the in crowd, whatever the in crowd might be. I was never part of the in crowd. I wasn't even sure what the in crowd was. Well, I kind of had an inkling when in my teens who the in crowd was, but I just didn't have the kind of credentials for it. I didn't look cool. And there are some people that just look cool, aren't there? Yeah? I didn't look cool. Brian Ferry always looks cool. I just look at him and think, how does that guy do it? Roxy Music, even today, looks cool. Don't you think? And someone's saying, who's Roxy Music? Oh, well, never mind. But I do. He's the epitome of cool. I was never the epitome of cool. Never. Okay. Milk it for all it's worth. But in a sense, that doesn't matter because Jesus didn't come for the in crowd only. He didn't come for those who were thought of as being special. He didn't just come for those that thought themselves to be grand, thought themselves to be famous, thought themselves to be worth something. He came for those who were worthless. I read an interesting article yesterday, or was it the day before, which got me thinking enormously about this. And the article was really about this guy has trouble with the Bible. And he has trouble with the Bible because the Bible is written from the perspective of the underdog. It's written from the perspective of those who do not have. It's written from the perspective of those who are defeated. It's not written from the perspective of the Roman Empire. It's not written from the perspective of the Egyptians. It's not written from the perspective of the Assyrians or anybody else who was a major empire of the time. It's written from those who were slaves. Imagine if the history of Britain was written from the perspective of the underdog. Interesting, isn't it? Written from the perspective of how those who felt having been colonised by the British. Hang on a minute, there is one there called the Americans. They did it. And there's an entirely different history written about the British colonisation of the Americas. But the Bible is written from the perspective of the underdog. Because God is on the side of the oppressed. God is on the side of those who have not. God is on the side of those who have nothing. And that made me started to make me think about how I read the Bible. How I read what God is saying to me through the Bible. Because I read it from the perspective of one who has. I read it from the perspective of one who has been the Roman emperor, the Roman Empire. From the perspective of the Egyptian. From the perspective of the one who has power, who has wealth. But Jesus is on the side of those who do not have wealth, who do not have power. And so the coming of the wise men is actually to tell me that God is on the side of those who are viewed as being of no importance at all. And that's important. Because God is for everyone. Rich, poor. He's for everyone, east, west, north and south. It does not matter where you have come from. It does not matter what your nationality is. It does not matter your birthplace. All races are welcome. You see, God sent his Son for the world. God is a missionary God. The reason why, as we've heard about Simon and Wendy a little earlier on, that they are able to go to Nepal is because God has already gone to Nepal. He is already there. He's not sending them as sort of as people who will be there for the first time and, wow, okay, God, let's do something together. God is already there doing a work. And he's called them to participate in that work, has he not? But the marvellous thing is that he has called you and me to do precisely the same thing. To be at work where God already is. That God is already in your workplace tomorrow. God is already in your place of school. God is already in your family. God is already in your road, in your street, with your neighbours and friends. God is there. And he's calling you to work with him in that place. He's sending you to be there with him. He's not sending you and then he'll say, I'll catch up with you a bit later. He's already there. He wants you to work with him. And the gifts to the king are significant. There's gold, the most precious metal known at the time. Gold for a king. Jesus is King of kings and Lord of lords. He is King of the universe, yet born of a Virgin Mary. That is just stupendous. This is the news of Christmas, that God has been made flesh and dwelt among us. And the message has it wonderfully. It puts it that God has been made flesh and moved into our neighbourhood. Isn't that great? God has moved in to be among us. That God isn't sort of some distant, faraway person. God is among us, here and now. So you haven't got to ask for God to be present. He is already present. He's already with you. And he's going to be with you when you go home. And he's going to be with you when you're on your own. He's going to be with you whatever you are doing. God is with you. That's the wonderful thing about Christmas. That the King of the whole universe has come among us. And is still among us. And then there's frankincense. This is a resin of a tree which the priests used. They sprinkled it on the fire during worship. Kind of make a nice smell. And that idea was that the aroma would be offered up. It would kind of be a symbol of people offering their lives to God, and it would be pleasing to God. So that the number of adverts you get at Christmas of aftershave and perfumes, they must spend an absolute fortune on it. And you just think, actually, all I want to do is, does it smell nice? But no, they want to have a motorcycle with the rear wheel on fire. Or they want to make this person look sultry and sort of... Do you think no, maybe not. But they just want to make this sort of... It's all it is a bit of stuff that smells. It's not kind of life-changing. And so the idea of frankincense was to offer something to God that smelt nice, that was pleasing to him. And in Israel, only the priests could offer this frankincense, could offer incense. But Jesus is our high priest. He goes into God's presence on behalf of us, to pray for us, to be there for us. And this work that God is doing, that Jesus is doing, is the work of coming into God's presence and offering himself for us. And that's the most pleasing aroma of all. That Jesus offers himself as a sacrifice for my sin and yours. That nothing else will do. Nothing else will make the grade. Nothing else will cut it. It's only Jesus' sacrifice for sin. Because he's my high priest and he's your high priest. And then there comes myrrh, which is a lovely word because it doesn't have any vowels in it. Just like that kind of stuff. And that speaks of sacrifice and suffering, because it was used for embalming. Funny gifts to give to a newborn child, wouldn't you say?
Yes.
I'm giving you a gift for your burial. Hang on a minute. This is a little toddler you're talking about. Why am I receiving a gift, allowing a gift for my child that's actually about his burial? And the reason is that's what he came for. That Jesus came to die. That somehow through the cross of Jesus, somehow through Jesus' death, my sin is forgiven. My sin is covered. My sin is dealt with. How God does it, I don't know, but he does it. Through the death of Jesus. And that death is the most important event in the history of humankind. Because it comes, and that's why Jesus has come to earth, in order that he might die. And so myrrh is a way of almost prophetically telling through the gift that Jesus has come to die. That's what he's come for. People say that Jesus is a great teacher, which he is. People say that he did marvellous things, which he did. But the most marvellous thing of all that Jesus did was he died for me. And he died for you. Because that's the way my sin is forgiven. And for me to say, yes, Lord, I believe that. Yes, Lord, I'll trust you for that. Yes, Lord, I will be standing on what you did at the cross. And I will believe you. See, Christ himself was the one and only sacrifice for sin. And that is sufficient. I don't need anything else. So when the wise men reached the house, they gave. And so should we. So, what are we going to give? Gold? Frankincense? Myrrh? Well, maybe not. But there are wrong reasons for giving. Before we even look about why we should give or what we should give, there are wrong reasons for giving. And one of the wrong reasons for giving is being reluctant. Now, you know, sometimes I've seen children where they've got a present for another child and the parents are sort of encouraging the first child to give the second child the present. And you can see that the first child is very reluctant to give this present away because the first child knows what's in it and likes what's in it and wants to play with what's in it and doesn't want to give it to the second child who might not want to share what's in it with the first child. You know, get the kind of scenario? Been there? Maybe you've even done it. And you kind of, well, go on, give it. No. Go on, give it. No. Give it. God doesn't want us to give reluctantly. Paul says in 2 Corinthians that we are to give with cheerfulness. Literally means with hilarity. Can you imagine? When the offering comes round, we're going, ha, 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 ha. That's it. We've got to give with such a hilarious spirit. We've got to give with sort of a abandon. Yeah! So that's the first thing. We don't want to be giving grudgingly. The second thing is we're not giving it as a kind of an investment, as a gamble. That if I give to God X amount, then in a little while's time, X plus 10 will come back my way. We're not giving to God in order that somehow he's going to fill our coffers even more because I've given. Okay, I'm giving £10, I want 15 back. That is not the way to give. Because we're using God as some kind of celestial investment brokerage. If I invest this bit, then I'm going to get that bit back, plus my investment. No. We're giving. Pure and simple. And the blessing that God might give to us might not be a blessing of material wealth at all. God might give to us a blessing of service, a blessing of suffering, a blessing that is not material at all. So we can't use giving as a way of hoping that more will come back our way. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity said, "I do not believe one can settle how much we ought to give. I'm afraid the only safe rule is to give more than we can spare." So let's not start talking about, well, if I've given 10%, which is a tithe in the Old Testament, then I've done my bit. Because a 10% for someone that's earning oodles of money is going to be a tiny amount of money. For someone that has very little, a 10% might actually be a massive amount. The New Testament doesn't actually talk about us tithing at all. What it does talk about is us being generous in our giving. It talks about us giving with hilarity. It talks about us giving because Christ has given to us. So we're not talking about giving for those reasons. What are we going to give them? First of all, we're going to give a gift of worship. So what did the wise men expect to find when they travelled so far? A child? Oh yes, they did. Because the star they'd seen indicated a birth. They don't go rushing around the world for every birth that's occurred. But they'd come with the intention of worshipping. Just notice what they said. They fell down and they worshipped. They were flat on their face, in other words. Now, we're not told they were surprised by the humble surroundings. They go to the palace first of all. But when they do find Jesus, they worship. They knelt and they worshipped. And so should we. That's the first gift we should give, is our worship. And we worship that which we think is worth something. That's what worship, that's the derivative of the word. Worship means to give back what we think is worth something. We give our worthship. So Jesus says, where our heart is, that's where our treasure is. So where's your heart? And our worship is designed to actually give to God that which we believe he is worth. Worship was often prostrating on the ground. Some traditions, ours including, makes it difficult to do that. You've got rows in front of you and rows behind you. You can't sort of lie on the ground. But our physical bodies need to express often what our heart is saying. So when you're alone, why not kneel? Why not lie flat on your face? In order to express something of your worship to God. He is worth worshipping. But whether we stand, whether we sit, whether we kneel, worship means offering all that we have and all that we are. It means offering to God our money, our possessions. It means offering him our abilities, our possessions, our time. But ultimately it means offering him our heart, our love. That we love God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, with all of our being. We love him. We put him first. Love is not just a fuzzy feeling. In fact, it might not be a fuzzy feeling at all. You know, that sort of warm glow when you're across the candlelit dinner table with the loved one of your dreams and your heart's desire, and you're up and you're kind of getting all fuzzy inside. Well, it might be just what you've eaten. But it isn't, love isn't just that. It might be, but it isn't just that. You might not have that as a feeling. Love is an act of will. You notice in kind of popular culture, when people get married, they say that you're asked, I do, or I. But actually, the minister doesn't ask you that. The minister never asks you, do you? Do you take? Do you? The minister will ask you, will you? And your response is, I will. Love is an act of will. I will do this. I will love you. I will take you. I will hold you special and forsake all others. This is what I will do. No matter what comes my way, no matter what happens, I will love you. It's an act of will. It's not what I feel. I might feel loving, I might not feel loving, but I will love. That's the promise. And that's what God wants of us. Not a fuzzy feeling, an act of our will. How much is God worth to us? The wise men brought expensive gifts of gold, incense and myrrh that would have cost a great deal. There's nothing to suggest that they were wealthy, let alone that they were kings. But these gifts were costly. Our gift of worship, true worship, is giving to Jesus something of value that we offer ourselves. God gave himself. He laid aside his power and his glory to become frail like us, human beings like us. And in doing so, he opened the way for each of us to have a personal relationship, to be friends with the living God. The wise men wouldn't have been able to express all that. They might not even been able to realise all that. But they listened to what God was saying and they followed the signs. And they found the Christ and they worshipped him. Question is, will you today? Will you worship him? Will you offer him your life, not just today, but throughout the week? As I say, worship isn't measured by our feel-good factor, but how much God is Lord of our lives in every part. So be wise. Be open to God to do a surprising thing in your life this year, whatever it might be. Don't be so engrossed in the familiar that you cannot hear God's voice leading you. As the wise men were open to God, so you be open to him too. So let's pray as we sing in the bleak midwinter.